There have been 7 or 8 attempts to shoot this video now. I'm very much trying to work off of no scripting, no notes, none of that. I have ideas in mind of what I want to talk about. The ideas seem a little preachy at times, and I go back on them, and then I decide that I like them, and then I'm here recording the video for the 9th time. That and technical difficulties, all this nonsense, yada yada yada. You don't care about that. I don't care about that. Today's book, Charles Mingus, Beneath the Underdog. His World as Composed by Mingus. This is a very unique book to me, in that it does not really feel like a music book. All the other books I've read for the channel, whether they be about poetry, or they be about biographies, or even Steve Reich's Conversations. That was a book that was very much a little tangential, but it was a conversations about music between musicians and artists. Or even the poetry book, I kind of linked back to this idea of, music. Poetry is an important part of music. It's kind of the spoken word version of most music for most people. Beneath the Underdog is not really about music. Don't get me wrong, it's about a musician. It's about music is included in it. There's conversations, he's like, oh, I was at this gig, or I was out playing with these guys, or, I was on the bus with Lionel Hampton, or all this stuff, But the focus is not music. It's the musician himself, very much. It's very much spotlight focus on Charles Mingus. Which, of course, I would never claim was a bad thing. I very much want to read about Charles Mingus. That's why I bought the book. Now, the book's format itself is a little weird, and consequently my format's going to be a little weird, because I don't want to do the normal 4 segments thing that I do. I want this to be a little more off the cuff, a little more on a human-to-human level, a little less scripted, polished. But I think this book was interesting to me in the fact that it's not really formatted like a book, like an autobiography of like, oh, back in the day I was doing this, I was at this place with these people, and here's what was happening, and here's what he said to me, and all this. It's very much kind of framed as this conversation. If you've ever read Virginia Woolf's The Waves, it's framed almost in a similar way. But Mingus kind of frames the whole book as kind of a conversation between himself and his psychiatrist. It starts out the first chapter with him talking to him. He gives this long statement, which I find to be a very fascinating one. In other words, I am 3. One man stands forever in the middle, unconcerned, unmoving, watching, waiting to be allowed to express what he sees to the other 2. The second man is like a frightened animal that attacks for fear of being attacked. Then there's an over-loving, gentle person who lets people into the uttermost sacred temple of his being, and he'll take insults and be trusting and sign contracts without reading them, and get talked down to working cheap or for nothing. And when he realizes what's been done to him, he feels like killing and destroying everything around him, including himself, for being so stupid. But he can't. He goes back inside himself. Which one is real? They're all real. He kind of frames this as a conversation between him and his doctor. There being the 3 lines of dialogue there. The big statements. Which one is real? The doctor. They're all real. Mingus. The book kind of continues in that vein, it almost discusses his life as from like a third-person point of view. He basically talks about himself like he's an outside viewer watching his life happen. That he's got some kind of influence on it, that he's kind of like a present omniscient figure almost, on the outside, helping himself, as a child, grow up. It's a very different style of storytelling. It's a very different way to approach an autobiography, in my opinion. The ones I have read haven't been very different from biographies. They've just been in the first person most of the time. It's very much a unique experience, and it's very much linked to how I view Mingus as a person, of course. This, I think, is supposed to be linked to how you view Mingus as a person. It's very much Mingus presenting himself, his world as composed by Mingus. It's not the true, unfiltered story of Mingus. It's not the facts and nothing but the facts as told by Charles Mingus. It's very much Charles Mingus presenting his life as he wants you to view it. And for all that, I think he did a great job. I very much feel more connected to the idea of how Mingus wants to be viewed. Not personally ever knowing Charles Mingus, or anyone who's known him. I'm very much separated from him as a person. I'm very much someone who's really only interacted with his work as a musician. A lot of his composing, a lot of his music I've listened to, I've played, I've analyzed all of that, but there's still a disconnect. And I think that this kind of shortens that mile-wide gap to half a mile. But it's very much a way to view Mingus. It's very much a way to see Mingus. And yeah, there's going to be a little bias because he's presenting himself how he wants to be seen, which is completely fair. I think the point of this is that you can kind of tell Mingus is a bit of an unreliable narrator. Where does it say? Some names in this work have been changed, and some of the characters and incidents are fictitious. Right off the bat, Mingus is telling you, he's not going to tell you the truth. He's not going to tell you what's real, what's not. He's going to tell you what he wants you to see. And for all that, I think we get this idea of Mingus. We get the image of Mingus that he wanted to present. And by studying that image, it's easier to see the real man beneath. I do think that regardless of what you think of any part of this book, any of it, because it is a fairly long read and it can be uncomfortable at times, it can be harsh, realistic, a little confusing, a little concerning. It can be all those things. I think regardless of what you think is true or false, I think the most true statement is the first paragraph of the book. In other words, I am free. Mingus kind of points out this eternal struggle within himself, between different parts of himself. And from looking at that, it's hard to see someone who's not human. It's hard to see the legend of Mingus. It's hard to see this idea you've got built up of him in your head from never having met him, like I have. I had this idea of Mingus as a composer, as a musician. And he's nothing like that. Why would he be? That's a two-dimensional image of a person I've never met or talked to. I've just tangentially interacted with their work in the world. I think the biggest part of this is understanding how to view Mingus outside of this. I'm not like a literature professor or some psychologist or sociologist who can tell you, based on how he wrote this, he was depressed or something, I've got what he told me. I've got what I know of the human psyche, but I very much appreciate this look into the person behind Charles Mingus, the person behind the image of Charles Mingus. It makes him feel a lot more human, a lot more understandable, a lot more approachable, and it was a tough read. It's very much a life experience that I will never have experienced, right? Charles Mingus is from California in the 1920s and 30s, raised as an African American. I am a white guy from Wisconsin who was born in the last 20-some years. Two wildly different lives. Two wildly different experiences, right? And because of that, there were some moments here that were uncomfortable for me. I'm not used to being confronted with racism or other kinds of race-based violence because I grew up in a majority white community in Wisconsin, So parts of this were a hard read. Other parts of this were a hard read because Mingus just had an interesting and hard life, And I don't want this to feel like I'm pitying him. That's not what it is at all. I feel nothing but utmost respect for a man who's been able to live through all of this and contribute to the world in the way that he has. And I feel like by reading this, I've got a better idea of him as a person. I probably said that 5 times, but I keep coming back to it because it's true. It's more Mingus. It's more who he is. And for someone who's never met him, and will never have the chance to meet him, this is the best I might get. And it's helped dispel that myth, that image of him in my mind that was, kind of falsely built up there. And if for nothing else, it was an interesting read. I do recommend this, not particularly if you're looking for, kind of if you're looking for a book similar to, say, Halsey Stevens' The Life and Music of Bela Bartok, right, where it goes over the life of Bela Bartok and then talks about his music, this analysis of it, that's not what this is. This is very much different. You will find absolutely no discussion of his music in here. There's no analysis, there's no, this is what I was thinking when I wrote this. This is how I wrote this. This is why I wrote this. Actually, I think there was 1 or 2 snippets in there where it was like, yeah, I wrote this because this guy was an asshole. And I hated him. That's funny. I like that. Or it's like, oh, I wrote this for this reason, or did this or this. There's just some small snippets. You're not going to get like a deep dive into the music of Charles Mingus from Charles Mingus, right? This is his story he wants to tell, and that's what he's going to do. So very much if you're interested in the story of Charles Mingus, the story of a black jazz musician growing up in the 20s and 30s, who went on to become a famous and well-known composer. If you're looking for the story of a man, and if you're interested in the story of life that he lives, I'd recommend this. If you're looking for like analysis of his work, go find something else. This is not this. I would definitely recommend this. My opinion is heavily leaning towards the very positive, right? And aside from the moments of discomfort that I had to come to terms with as being a white dude, and some smaller moments where I was like, it's a little weird, a little strange, but not my life. Gonna try not to judge that one. I could not help but recommend this for a read. It is the epitome of fascinating. It's structured uniquely, which I think makes it more of an interesting read in itself. And, it's not too long. 360 pages about, you can get through that in a week, day, month. If you want to read about a page a day, it'll only take you about a year. So, there's that. But if you have read this, or any of other books on Charles Mingus, or, anything about Charles Mingus at all, leave me a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. Mingus is a favorite of mine. I love his work. And I'm going to be reading a few more books on him real soon, one by one of his wives, one by somebody else. But yes, I'd love to hear your opinion on Mingus, his autobiography, his music, whatever you'd like to talk about. Leave that in the comments below. Do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe if you've enjoyed. And thanks. That's all.